The air in the balcony of St. Jude's was always 3 degrees cooler than anywhere else in the church, and it smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was my sanctuary, a forgotten shelf high above the polished pews and the bowed heads of the faithful. I did not come here for faith. I came for the quiet, for the anonymity of being a ghost in the rafters, watching the Sunday morning ritual unfold below like a silent film. My life was a series of quiet, contained spaces, and this was the quietest, most contained of them all. From my perch, I could see everything, but no one ever looked up. No one ever saw me. My routine was built on this invisibility. I worked the early shift at the daily grind, frothing milk and wiping down counters until my back ached with a dull, familiar rhythm. I lived in a room above a laundromat where the scent of warm cotton was a constant, cloying comfort. My existence felt small, meticulously ordered to prevent any sudden movements, any unexpected costs. I was 24, and I had learned the hard way that the world had sharp edges. Hiding was a form of self-preservation. Every Sunday, I watched him, Mr. Julian Croft. He was as much a fixture of this church as the stained glass windows depicting solemn-faced saints. He was a man carved from a different, harder stone than the rest of us. He sat alone in the front pew, always the same one, a pew that seemed to belong to him by an unspoken agreement. He was a widower, a local legend of industry and philanthropy, a man whose quiet presence filled any room he entered. His grief was a well-tailored suit he wore with unshakable dignity. I never saw it fray at the edges. I knew the stories, of course, the whispers that followed him like a fine mist. The tragic loss of his wife, Eleanor, years ago, the fortune he'd built, and the quiet, immense ways he used it to prop up our small town. He funded the library expansion, the new wing of the hospital, the scholarships that sent our brightest kids off to college. He was a pillar, a foundation. To me, sitting in the dusty silence, he was a study in stillness. I watched the line of his shoulders, the way he held his head, the utter lack of fidgeting in his large, capable hands. He was a man who had found his center, even if that center was a hollowed-out space. I had a reason for my fascination, a small, selfish one. He was beautiful, not in the bright, easy way of the young men I saw on my phone screen, but in a deeper, more resonant way. His hair was more silver than black, thick and neat. The lines around his eyes were etched by time and, I imagined, by sorrow. They were not signs of decay, but of a life lived. He was solid, grounded, everything I was not. I was a leaf caught in a perpetual draft. He was the ancient oak that stood unmoving against the wind. That Sunday began like any other. The organ, usually a booming, resonant beast under the skilled hands of Mrs. Gable, was silent. Reverend Michael explained that a pipe had burst sometime during the week, a cascade of water damaging the plaster and silencing the grand old instrument. The service felt muted, incomplete, the hymns sung a cappella with a kind of hesitant fragility. The absence of the organ's thunderous voice made the cavernous church feel even larger, even emptier. I was settled in my usual corner, the third pew from the back of the balcony, tucked behind a thick stone pillar that obscured me almost completely. I had my book, a tattered paperback of art history, resting unread in my lap. The light filtering through the high arched windows cast long, dusty rays across the empty rows around me. This was my space, mine and the dust motes dancing in the light. The soft groan of the heavy balcony door opening behind me was a violation. My entire body went rigid. No one ever came up here. The stairs were steep, tucked away behind a narrow door most people didn't even know existed. I held my breath, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. I heard the slow, measured fall of footsteps on the wooden floorboards, the sound muffled but clear in the hushed atmosphere. I did not turn. I kept my eyes fixed on the congregation below, pretending I hadn't heard. Maybe it was the sexton coming to check on a loose floorboard. Maybe it was a curious child who had wandered away from their parents. The footsteps drew closer, steady, unhurried. They stopped just behind my pew. I could feel a presence, a weight in the air that hadn't been there a moment before. Then, the footsteps resumed, moving alongside my row. I risked a glance from the corner of my eye. I saw a dark, perfectly tailored suit trouser, a polished black leather shoe. My breath hitched. It was him. It was Mr. Julian Croft. He walked the length of the pew, his movements economical and deliberate, and then he slid onto the wooden bench beside me. He left a respectful distance between us, a good 2 feet of worn wood, but his presence was overwhelming. It was like having a mountain suddenly materialize next to you. The air thickened, charged with the scent of clean linen, cedar, and something else, something uniquely him. I was frozen, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a calm, patient hawk. He did not look at me. He settled himself, his hands resting on his knees, and looked out over the church, his profile sharp and noble against the stained glass light. We sat in silence for a full minute. Below us, the Reverend's voice droned on about charity and community. I could feel the heat radiating from Julian's body, a steady, surprising warmth. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into the wood grain of the pew until I was nothing but a knot in the pine. My invisibility cloak had been ripped away, and I felt naked, exposed. Then he spoke. His voice was low, a quiet baritone that didn't so much break the silence as become a part of it. It was meant only for me. Sit with me. It was not a question. It was not a command. It was a statement, an invitation into a shared space. It was the simplest of sentences, yet it landed with the weight of a covenant. He still hadn't looked at me. His gaze remained fixed on the scene below, as if to grant me the dignity of making my decision without the pressure of his attention. My throat was tight, my tongue a dry stone in my mouth. I managed a single, jerky nod, a motion so small I wasn't sure he could have seen it. But he seemed to sense it. A subtle relaxation in his shoulders told me he had. And so I sat. I sat there, beside Julian Croft, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the quiet beat of the sermon. For the first time in years, I was not invisible. I had been seen. And the most terrifying, most wonderful part of it all was that I did not feel the urge to run. I felt anchored. When the service ended, the congregation began to shuffle out, their polite murmurs rising to fill the nave. Julian remained seated, and so I did too, unsure of the protocol. He waited until the last of the parishioners had filed out, until only the quiet hum of the building remained. Then he finally turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were a deep, thoughtful gray, the color of a storm cloud over a calm sea. The lines around them crinkled slightly. "Leo," he said, and the sound of my own name from his lips was a strange sort of shock. He knew my name. Of course, he did. I worked in the most popular coffee shop in town. Still, it felt significant. "I apologize if I startled you. This balcony, it offers a better perspective on the water damage." He gestured vaguely toward the organ loft on the opposite side. It was a plausible excuse, a perfect gentleman's lie to cover the strangeness of his action. I found my voice, though it came out as a rough whisper. "It's fine, Mr. Croft. I was just reading." His gaze dropped to the book in my lap, then returned to my face. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Art history. A noble pursuit." He paused, his expression turning more serious. "The church board met yesterday. The repairs will be extensive. We're bringing in specialists from the city. It's a significant project." I just nodded, unsure of what my role in this conversation was supposed to be. I was just the boy from the coffee shop who hid in the church balcony. "We need someone on site," he continued, his voice even and direct. "Someone reliable to be here during the day, to let the craftsmen in and out, to make sure the premises are secure when they leave. It's a position of trust." He held my gaze, and I felt that sense of being truly seen again, weighed and measured in a way that was unnerving but not unkind. "Reverend Michael mentioned you. He said you were responsible, that you could use the work." My mind raced. "A job. Here, in my sanctuary. A real job, with real responsibility. The pay would undoubtedly be better than the pittance I earned wrestling with the espresso machine. It was a lifeline, thrown from an entirely unexpected quarter. "The pay is 3 times what you are making at the cafe," he said, as if reading my thoughts. There was no judgment in his tone, just a statement of fact. "Your hours would be flexible. The work would last for the duration of the restoration, perhaps 2 or 3 months." I should have been overjoyed. I should have been tripping over myself to accept. But a knot of caution tightened in my stomach. It was too much, too fast. A man like Julian Croft didn't just offer jobs to stray boys in balconies. There had to be a catch. I was wary of kindness that came with a price tag, and his was a fortune I could never hope to repay. "Why me?" I asked, the words bolder than I felt. He didn't flinch from the directness of the question. He considered it for a moment, his gray eyes searching my face. Because you love this place, he said, his voice soft. I've seen you here. You don't come for the sermon. You come for the building, for the quiet. You see the beauty in the bones of it. I need someone who will care for it, not just watch over it. Am I wrong? He was not wrong. He had seen more of me in his quiet observations from the front pew than most people who spoke to me every day. The accuracy of his perception was disarming. It stripped away my defenses, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. No, I whispered. You're not wrong. The offer stands, Leo, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Think it over. You can let the Reverend know your decision. He made a move to stand, a smooth, fluid motion. As he rose, his hand brushed against my arm. It was nothing, a fleeting contact of wool against my thin cotton shirt, but a jolt of warmth shot through me, sharp and startling. It was over in a second, but the feeling lingered, a phantom heat on my skin. He gave me a small, formal nod, and then he was gone, his footsteps receding down the narrow staircase, leaving me alone once more in the cool, silent air of the balcony. But the space was different now. It was no longer just mine. He had been here. The air was still charged with his presence. The wood of the pew beside me still held the ghost of his warmth. I looked down at my hands, which were trembling slightly. My quiet, contained world had just been breached, not with force, but with a gentle, irresistible gravity. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was going to say yes. The next morning, I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the cafe. My manager, a perpetually stressed woman named Brenda, was surprised but wished me well. I walked over to the church and found Reverend Michael in his office, a small, cluttered room that smelled of old books and peppermint tea. I told him I would take the job. He beamed, his round face crinkling into 1,000 happy lines, and told me Mr. Croft would be pleased. He handed me a set of heavy, ornate brass keys. They felt solid and real in my palm, a tangible symbol of the new chapter that was about to begin. My first day was quiet. The restoration team wasn't scheduled to arrive until the following week. My only duty was to be present. Julian had left a small, handwritten note for me on the vestry table, along with a check for my first week's pay, in advance. The generosity of it made me uncomfortable. The note was simple, written in a strong, clean script. It outlined a few basic expectations and ended with his private cell phone number. Call if you need anything at all. JC. I spent the day exploring the empty church, not as a hiding observer, but as its temporary guardian. I walked the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. I ran my fingers over the cool, smooth marble of the baptismal font. I studied the faces in the stained glass windows, their jewel-toned colors painting the stone floor in shifting patterns of light. This place was a masterpiece of craft and devotion, and for a little while, it was mine to protect. The thought filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a very long time. I started bringing my art history textbooks with me. In the long, quiet hours, I would sit in the front pew, his pew, and read. I studied the chapters on Gothic architecture, on frescoes and stone masonry, and then I would walk through the church and see the examples right in front of me. The pointed arches, the ribbed vaults, the flying buttresses I could see from the side windows. The building became my classroom. My connection to it deepened, shifting from a passive appreciation to an active, intellectual engagement. Julian began to stop by, not every day, but often enough that his presence became a part of the new routine. He would appear without a sound, a tall, solid figure standing at the back of the nave. He never came to inspect my work. He came, it seemed, simply to be in the space. He would walk slowly through the church, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze taking in the details with a quiet reverence. Our conversations were brief at first, focused on the church. He would point out a detail of woodworking I hadn't noticed, or tell me a story about a particular window donated by one of his ancestors. He spoke of the building as if it were a living thing, a repository of community memory, and I would listen, absorbing his words, his quiet passion for the place. One afternoon, he found me sketching the intricate carvings on the pulpit. I was so engrossed I didn't hear him approach. When he spoke, his voice close to my ear, I jumped. "You have a good eye," he said. I snapped my sketchbook shut, my face flushing with embarrassment. My drawings were amateurish, just clumsy attempts to understand the lines and forms. "It's nothing," I mumbled, feeling like a child caught doing something he shouldn't. Nonsense, he said, his tone gentle but firm. May I? He gestured to the sketchbook. Hesitantly, I handed it to him. He took it with a surprising delicacy, his large hands cradling the small book as if it were a fragile artifact. He flipped through the pages slowly, his expression unreadable. I held my breath, waiting for the polite dismissal. You see the structure, he said after a long moment, his gaze still on my sketches. The way the weight is distributed. Most people just see the decoration. He looked up at me, his gray eyes serious. You have a talent, Leo. It would be a shame to let it go to waste. His praise was a warm current spreading through my chest. It was more than just a compliment. It was an acknowledgement. He saw me. He saw the part of me that I kept hidden, the part that yearned for beauty and form, the part that had been forced into dormancy by the harsh realities of my life. The next morning, he arrived with 2 cups of coffee from the daily grind. He handed one to me. It was exactly how I used to make it for myself, black, with a half shot of hazelnut. I had never told him. He must have just observed it, filed it away. The small, thoughtful detail sent a strange flutter through my stomach. You looked cold yesterday, was all he said, a simple explanation that held a world of unspoken observation. We sat together in the front pew, sipping our coffee in a comfortable silence, watching the morning light creep across the stone floor. It felt domestic, companionable. A quiet intimacy was beginning to form between us, woven from these small gestures, these shared moments of silence. I started to notice things about him. The way he would rub his thumb over his wedding ring when he was deep in thought, a gesture that was so ingrained it was clearly unconscious. The faint, almost invisible scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his voice, always so calm and measured, would soften almost imperceptibly when he spoke of his late wife. He never said much about her, but her presence was a constant, a quiet ache that lived just beneath the surface of his composure. I found myself analyzing every interaction, every word, every glance. I was a detective searching for clues, trying to decipher the enigma of Julian Croft. Was his kindness simply the noblesse oblige of a wealthy man towards a charity case? Or was there something more? I was terrified of misreading the signals, of projecting my own burgeoning feelings onto his simple, decent actions. The difference in our ages, our stations in life, was a chasm between us, a vast, unbridgeable gap. To even imagine crossing it felt like a form of madness. The restoration team arrived the following week, a crew of skilled artisans from the city. The church was suddenly filled with the sounds of careful work, the scrape of tools, the low murmur of professional conversation, the smell of sawdust and plaster dust. My job became more active. I was the liaison, the keeper of keys and schedules. I made sure the crew had what they needed, that the delicate, historic parts of the church were protected from the work. Julian was there every day now, conferring with the project foreman, a gruff but brilliant man named Sal. I watched Julian move through the controlled chaos of the worksite with an easy authority. He was not a distant benefactor. He was deeply involved, his knowledge of architecture and construction surprisingly extensive. He would discuss blueprints with Sal, his finger tracing a line, his questions sharp and insightful. He was a man of substance, not just of wealth. One afternoon, they were working on the damaged plaster near the organ loft, high up on a scaffold. I was on the ground below, sorting through a delivery of supplies. Sal called down to me, asking me to bring up a specific tool. I found it and started up the scaffolding, which swayed slightly under my weight. I had never been good with heights. Halfway up, my foot slipped on a patch of dust. I lost my balance, my heart leaping into my throat. I flailed, grabbing for a handhold, my fingers scraping against rough wood. Before I could fall, a strong hand clamped around my bicep, steadying me. It was Julian. He had been on the platform just above me, and he had moved with a speed that belied his calm demeanor. "Easy there," he said, his voice a low rumble next to my ear. His grip was firm, unyielding, holding me securely until I found my footing again. "I've got you." I was pressed against the scaffolding, my cheek close to his chest. I could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady, slow beat of his heart. The scent of him, cedar and clean linen, filled my senses. For a moment, I just leaned into his strength, my fear forgotten, replaced by a dizzying sense of safety. His hand lingered on my arm for a second longer than necessary after I was steady. When he finally let go, The absence of his touch was a sudden cold spot. I mumbled my thanks, my face burning, and quickly climbed the rest of the way to the platform, handing the tool to Sal without meeting Julian's eyes. But I could feel his gaze on me, watchful and concerned. The incident was small, a minor slip, but the memory of his hand on my arm, the feeling of his solid presence holding me up, stayed with me for the rest of the day. It was a simple, protective act, but it felt intensely personal. It was a touch that meant something, a silent declaration that he was watching over me. And I was beginning to realize, with a terrifying thrill, how much I wanted him to. The work on the church progressed with a steady, satisfying rhythm. The damaged plaster was repaired, the silenced organ was being meticulously restored by a specialist, and the raw scent of new wood from the choir stalls filled the air. My days fell into a pattern of early mornings, the quiet companionship of the work crew, and the now constant presence of Julian. He was the still point around which the entire project turned. The small, ambiguous touches continued, becoming a secret language between us. When he passed me a blueprint, his fingers would brush against mine, a fleeting contact that sent a spark up my arm. Once, we were standing side by side, looking up at the newly installed pipes of the organ. Our shoulders touched. It was a small, incidental contact in a narrow space, the kind of thing two people would normally murmur an apology for and shift away from. Neither of us did. We just stood there, the warmth of the contact a solid, living thing between us, a silent acknowledgement that we both wanted to be closer. I lived for these moments. I replayed them in my mind at night, in my small room above the laundromat, dissecting them for meaning. Was I imagining things? Was this just the wishful thinking of a lonely young man who had been starved for kindness? I was afraid to hope. The chasm between our lives was too vast. He was Julian Croft, a man who moved in a world of boardrooms and charity galas. I was Leo, the boy who served coffee and hid in church balconies. Our orbits should never have intersected, let alone aligned. One afternoon, a delivery of massive, custom-milled oak planks arrived. They were for the new choir stalls, each one heavy and unwieldy. The delivery truck was too large to navigate the narrow, winding lane that led to the church's side entrance. The driver, a burly man with a sigh of resignation, unloaded them onto the curb at the end of the lane. Sal and his crew were busy on the scaffolding. It was just me and Julian. "Well," Julian said, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt to reveal strong, sinewed forearms. "It seems we have a job to do. For the next 2 hours, we became a team. We carried those heavy planks, one by one, down the 100-yard lane and into the church. The work was grueling. The wood was heavy, its edges rough against our hands. Sweat beaded on my forehead and trickled down my back. I saw a sheen of it on Julian's temples, saw the way his muscles bunched and strained under the load. In the shared physical effort, the careful, formal distance between us dissolved. We were no longer benefactor and employee. We were just two men, working together, our breaths coming in ragged pants, our movements falling into an easy, synchronized rhythm. He would take the heavier end without comment. He would watch to make sure my grip was secure before we lifted. There was an unspoken partnership in our labor, a sense of mutual reliance that was more intimate than any conversation we'd had. When the last plank was safely inside, we collapsed onto the cool stone steps of the church entrance, exhausted and breathing heavily. The late afternoon sun warmed our faces. Julian pulled a bottle of water from a bag he'd left by the door and passed it to me first. I drank deeply, the cool liquid a balm to my parched throat. I passed it back to him, and he did the same, his throat working as he drank. We sat in a comfortable, weary silence for a few minutes, the only sound our own breathing and the distant chirp of sparrows. The world felt simple, reduced to this one moment of shared accomplishment and rest. Julian broke the silence, his voice a little rough from the exertion. He was looking out at the churchyard, at the old, weathered headstones sleeping under the shade of an ancient yew tree. "Eleanor loved this place," he said, his voice quiet and reflective. "She played the organ here, you know, from the time she was 16 until, well, until she couldn't anymore." It was the most he had ever said about her to me. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened, giving him the space to speak. "She said the music was the church's heartbeat," he continued, a faint, sad smile on his lips. When that pipe burst and silenced the organ, it felt, it felt like it had happened all over again. He turned his head and looked at me, his gray eyes holding a surprising vulnerability. I feel I have to make sure it's preserved. To fix it. Sometimes I worry I'm just throwing money at a memory, trying to repair something that can't be unbroken. His confession hung in the air between us, a raw and honest admission of his grief. He was not just a stoic pillar of the community. He was a man still deeply in love with the memory of his wife, a man trying to honor her in the only way he knew how. My heart ached for him. Then, his expression shifted, his focus turning entirely to me. His gaze was intense, searching. "Does this arrangement feel fair to you, Leo?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "My involvement, this job. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated. In any way." The question was a quiet explosion. He was acknowledging the power imbalance between us, the unspoken complexities of our situation. He was not just asking about the job. He was asking about everything. About the lingering touches, the shared coffee, the silent companionship. He was giving me an out. He was handing me all the power, all the agency, laying it at my feet and waiting for my decision. It was the most respectful, most considerate thing anyone had ever done for me. I met his gaze, my heart pounding a steady, certain rhythm. "It feels fair," I said, my voice clear and stronger than I expected. "It feels right." A look of profound relief washed over his face, softening the sharp lines of his features. He gave me a small, slow nod, a silent acceptance of my answer. In that moment, something shifted between us. A wall had come down. We were no longer just two men working on a project. We were two people on the verge of something new, something fragile and terrifying and beautiful. The silence that fell between us now was not one of companionship, but of anticipation. It was the quiet intake of breath before the first note of a song is sung. The town was small, and small towns have a way of noticing things. Our routine, Julian and me, arriving at the church in the morning, often leaving together as the evening light faded, did not go unobserved. The whispers started subtly, a few curious glances from parishioners who stopped by to check on the restoration's progress. But soon, they grew more pointed. Mr. Abernathy was the self-appointed guardian of the town's moral compass. He was a portly, officious man on the church board, with a knack for inserting himself where he wasn't wanted. He found me one afternoon while I was sweeping sawdust near the entrance. "Quite the project you've landed yourself, young man," he said, his tone slick with false geniality. His small, shrewd eyes darted around the church, then settled on me. "Mr. Croft has taken a real interest in you. It's always so heartening to see our community leaders take a charitable interest in the less fortunate." The words were a slap, each one weighted with insinuation. He was painting me as a charity case, a boy toy for the wealthy widower. A hot, shameful blush crept up my neck. I felt my old impulse to shrink, to become invisible, rise up in me. I mumbled something noncommittal, my eyes fixed on the floor. Julian emerged from the vestry just as Abernathy was turning to leave. He must have overheard the last part of the exchange, must have seen the look on my face. His own expression hardened into a mask of cool civility. He gave Abernathy a nod so brief and dismissive it was an insult in itself. Abernathy scurried away, flustered. Julian walked over to me. He didn't mention Abernathy. He didn't ask what had been said. He simply looked at me, his gaze steady and reassuring. "People will talk, Leo," he said, his voice low and calm. "Their words have no power unless we give it to them. What matters is that you are comfortable. Are you?" He was protecting me, not by confronting the gossip, but by reinforcing my own agency. He was making it clear that my feelings were the only ones that mattered in this equation. He was building a fortress around me, not of his wealth or power, but of his respect. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time, it was the truth. The shame was gone, replaced by a surge of gratitude so strong it almost buckled my knees. I was not alone in this. That evening, he called me. "I'm making dinner," he said, his voice warm over the line. "There are some final blueprints I'd like to go over with you. Would you join me?" The excuse was thin, we both knew it. This was not about blueprints. This was a deliberate step, a movement from the public space of the church into the private space of his home. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'd like that," I said. His house was on a hill overlooking the town, A beautiful old stone manor surrounded by acres of meticulously kept gardens. It was grand, but it didn't feel ostentatious. It felt settled, like it had grown out of the earth. Inside, it was elegant and tasteful, filled with art and books. But it was also silent. The silence here was different from the churches. This was the silence of emptiness, of a space built for a family that was now occupied by only one. He cooked for me. A simple, delicious meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. We ate in a cozy dining nook off the kitchen, the grand dining room left dark and unused. The conversation was easy at first, about the progress on the church, about my art history studies. But underneath the surface, a current of tension flowed, a deep, unspoken awareness of what this evening meant. After dinner, we moved to his study, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and smelling of old leather and wood smoke. He poured us each a small glass of amber-colored liquid that he called a digestive. He didn't take out any blueprints. He stood by the large bay window that looked out over the twinkling lights of the town below. I stood a few feet away, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling young and out of place. "What do you want, Leo?" he asked, his back still to me. His voice was quiet, but the question filled the silent room. "After this job is done, what do you see for yourself?" He wasn't asking about my career plans. I knew that. He was asking something deeper, something more fundamental. The question was an invitation to be honest, to be vulnerable. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but his gentle sincerity gave me courage. I took a deep breath. "I want to not feel invisible," I said, the words barely a whisper, but they felt like a shout in the stillness. "I've spent so long trying to be unseen, to not take up space. I'm tired of hiding." He turned then, his face illuminated by the soft light of a desk lamp. His expression was one of profound tenderness, his gray eyes soft and full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. It looked like recognition. "You were never invisible to me," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "From the very first time I saw you, hiding up in that balcony, you were the most solid thing in the entire church." He took a step towards me, then another, until he was standing just in front of me. The space between us was electric, charged with months of unspoken feelings, of quiet observation, of gentle care. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat of his body, could see the pulse beating in the strong column of his throat. My own heart was a wild thing in my chest, a frantic drumming that seemed to echo in the quiet room. The silence stretched, no longer comfortable, but heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. It was a silence that had to be broken, or it would break us. I found my voice, my question a raw plea. "Why me? For the job? For all of this?" Julian's gaze never left mine. His eyes were open, unguarded, all of his carefully constructed composure stripped away. In that moment, he was not the wealthy benefactor, not the stoic widower. He was just a man, full of a deep and quiet yearning that mirrored my own. "Because," he began, his voice a low, rough murmur, "from the first time I saw you hiding in that balcony, you looked like the only other person in the world who understood what silence was for. You weren't trying to fill it. You were just listening to it." He took another small step, closing the last of the distance between us. Our bodies were almost touching. He smelled of soap and the faint, clean scent of the night air clinging to his clothes. "And because," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a soft, intimate rumble that vibrated through my very bones, "I find myself wanting to break that silence with you. Only with you." He lifted his hand, the movement slow and deliberate. He didn't touch me, not yet. He let his hand hover in the air between us, a silent question, a profound gesture of respect. He was offering, not taking. The choice was entirely mine. My breath hitched. This was it. The precipice. The moment where everything could change. And I was not afraid. All the fear, all the doubt, all the insecurity that had plagued me for years simply fell away, replaced by a deep, resonant certainty. This was right. I leaned forward, closing that final, infinitesimal gap, pressing my cheek into his open palm. His skin was warm, his fingers slightly calloused. It was the touch I had been craving, the anchor I had been searching for. A soft, shaky sigh escaped my lips. His fingers gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly over my cheekbone. He tilted my head up, his gray eyes searching mine, giving me one last chance to pull away. I met his gaze without hesitation. Then, he lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate need. It was a kiss of recognition, of arrival. It was slow, gentle, and infinitely tender. His lips were soft, firm, moving against mine with a quiet, unhurried confidence. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a fulfillment, all in one breathtaking moment. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had. It felt like coming home. It felt like every scattered, broken piece of me was being gently gathered up and made whole. It was a kiss that tasted of quiet certainty and a future I had never dared to imagine. When we finally, reluctantly, broke apart, he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. His hand was still cupping my face, his thumb still making slow, soothing circles on my skin. I closed my eyes, just savoring the feeling of his closeness, the solid, reassuring weight of his presence. "Leo," he whispered, and my name was a prayer, a confirmation, a song. It was full of a profound relief that I felt echoed in my own soul. I opened my eyes. His were still fixed on me, and in their depths, I saw my own reflection, no longer a ghost in the rafters, but a man who was seen and wanted. My own hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, came up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart under my palm, a rhythm that felt as familiar and as vital as my own. In the quiet of his study, with the lights of the town spread out like a carpet of fallen stars below, my small, contained world had cracked wide open, not to break me, but to let the light in. He offered me the guest room that night. It was a gesture of profound care, an unspoken understanding that what had just happened was too important to be rushed, too precious to be complicated by expectation. The room was beautiful, larger than my entire apartment, with a bed so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud. But I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. The memory of the kiss was a warm, glowing ember in my chest. But as the initial euphoria faded, a familiar chill of anxiety began to creep in. The morning light brought with it a harsh clarity. I woke to the silence of the large house, feeling small and out of place. I crept downstairs and found Julian in the kitchen, dressed in casual trousers and a soft gray sweater, reading a newspaper at a sun-drenched breakfast table. He looked up when I entered, and his face broke into a warm, genuine smile that made my heart ache. "Good morning," he said, his voice as warm as the sunlight streaming through the window. "There's coffee," but as I poured myself a cup, the awkwardness I had been dreading descended. The sheer scale of his life was all around me. The gourmet kitchen, the priceless art on the walls, the view of the sprawling estate from the window. I was a trespasser in a world I didn't belong to. The kiss had felt like a meeting of equals, but in the light of day, the chasm between us seemed wider than ever. Was I just a novelty to him? A project? A way to fill the echoing silence of his life? The old insecurities came rushing back, a tide of doubt that threatened to pull me under. I must have been quieter than I realized, because he put down his paper and studied my face, his expression concerned. He sensed my withdrawal, the invisible wall I was building between us. He didn't press or pry. He simply spoke, his voice calm and steady, a lifeline in my sea of uncertainty. "I know this is a lot," he said, gesturing vaguely at the house around us. "My life is complicated, but what happened last night was not. It was the simplest, most honest thing that has happened to me in a very long time." He reached across the small table, his hand covering mine where it rested on the cool marble. His touch was warm, grounding. "I have no expectations, Leo," he said, his gaze holding mine, demanding I believe him. "We can take this as slowly as you need. Your independence, your life, that is not something I ever want to compromise. That is part of who you are. Part of the man I am so drawn to." His words were a balm to my raw nerves. He saw my fear, and he met it not with dismissal, but with understanding and reassurance. "Perhaps," he continued thoughtfully, "it would be best if you finished overseeing the last phase of the church project from your own apartment. You can check in at the site each day, of course, but this way, you will have your space. We will have our space." It was the perfect solution. He was not pushing me away. He was consciously, deliberately creating room for me to breathe, to process, to feel secure. He was dismantling the power imbalance, piece by piece, with his quiet consideration. He was proving, through his actions, that my comfort and my agency were his highest priorities. The knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. I squeezed his hand, a silent thank you. A few days later, the test I knew was coming finally arrived. I was at the church, speaking with Sal, when Mr. Abernathy appeared. He ignored Sal completely, his attention fixed solely on me. His face was a mask of saccharine concern. "Leo, my boy," he began, his voice oozing insincerity. "I do hope you're not allowing yourself to be taken advantage of. A man in Mr. Croft's position, well, grief can make people do strange things. And a young man in your position is so vulnerable." The insinuation was clear and venomous. In the past, I would have withered under such an attack. I would have stammered an apology and fled. But standing there, bolstered by the memory of Julian's respect, by the certainty of his feelings, I felt a new strength solidify within me. I met Mr. Abernathy's gaze directly, my expression calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply refused to accept his premise. "Mr. Croft has been a very kind employer," I said, my voice even and clear, "and a good friend. I'm very grateful for the opportunity he's given me." I offered him nothing more. I didn't confirm or deny his suspicions. I simply stated a truth so simple and solid that his poisonous insinuations couldn't find purchase. He was left sputtering, his attack diffused by my refusal to engage in the drama. He finally mumbled something and retreated. When I told Julian about it later that evening, over the phone, he was silent for a moment. I could picture him, rubbing his thumb over his wedding ring. "You handled that with grace, Leo," he said finally, his voice full of a quiet pride that made my heart swell. "You stood your ground, we were navigating it. Not by hiding, or by issuing defiant proclamations, but by living our growing connection with a quiet dignity that rendered the gossip of small minds irrelevant. We were building something strong, something that could withstand the whispers." The church restoration was finally completed. The last of the scaffolding came down, the drop cloths were folded away, and the scent of sawdust was replaced by the familiar aroma of lemon polish and old hymnals. The church was more beautiful than ever, the restored plaster gleaming, the new choir stalls glowing with the warmth of polished oak. And on the last day, the organ tuner finished his work. Mrs. Gable sat down at the console, took a deep breath, and played. The sound that filled the church was magnificent. A thunderous, joyful noise that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, to vibrate in my bones. It was the sound of a heartbeat, strong and steady and sure, returned to the body of the church. Julian was standing beside me at the back of the nave. I glanced at him and saw that his eyes were shining with unshed tears. He was not just hearing music. He was hearing a memory, a legacy, a promise kept. Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. He laced his fingers through mine, his grip firm and warm. We stood there, hand in hand, listening to the music, two solitary souls who had found a shared harmony in the quiet spaces. There was a small dedication ceremony that weekend. The church was packed. Julian, as the project's benefactor, was expected to say a few words. I stood in the crowd, watching him at the pulpit. He spoke with his usual quiet eloquence about community, about heritage, about the importance of preserving the beautiful things we inherit. He never once mentioned the size of his donation. He made it about us, about the town. As he finished, his eyes scanned the crowd and found mine. He held my gaze for a long moment, and in that public space, in front of everyone, he gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a message meant only for me, a public acknowledgement of our private bond. And I smiled back. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled over coffee and cookies, we found a quiet moment in the churchyard. The air was cool, the sky a deepening twilight blue. "The job is over," I said, the words tasting of both accomplishment and a little bit of sadness. My time as the church's guardian had come to an end. Julian turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. "Is it?" he asked, a gentle, teasing light in his eyes. I was rather hoping a new one was just beginning. My heart did a slow, happy flip in my chest. "And what job is that?" "The challenging, long-term project of us," he said. His expression turned serious, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "I want to build something with you, Leo. Something real and lasting. If that's what you want, too." "It is," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's all I want. We stood there for a long time, talking about what came next. We made a conscious choice, a deliberate plan. We would proceed with care, with steadiness, with a deep and abiding respect for each other's lives and boundaries. He wanted to help me go back to school, to finish my art history degree. But he didn't just offer to write a check. He told me about a private arts foundation his family had long supported. He would write me a letter of recommendation, connect me with the director, help me apply for a scholarship on my own merits. He was not giving me a handout. He was opening a door for me to walk through myself. He was investing in my future, not buying it. He pulled a single key from his pocket. It was not the heavy, ornate brass key to the church, but a modern, simple house key. For you, he said, pressing it into my palm. Come and go as you please. This is your space, too. If you want it to be, I took out my own key, the one to my small room above the laundromat. It looked flimsy and insignificant next to his. I held it out to him. It's not much, I said, my voice a little shaky. But it's mine, and I want you to have it. He took the key from me as if I had just handed him a priceless treasure. He closed his hand around it, his expression full of a love so profound it took my breath away. It wasn't about the value of the property. It was about the trust. We were equals in this, offering each other the keys to our lives, to our separate, quiet spaces, in the hope of building a shared one. A few weeks later, it was a Saturday morning. I had stayed the night at his house, in his bed. Waking up next to him felt like the most natural thing in the world. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. The morning sun was just beginning to spill over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. I put on a pot of coffee, the familiar, comforting aroma filling the quiet room. The kitchen no longer felt vast and intimidating. It felt welcoming. It felt like a part of my own story. I felt strong arms wrap around my waist from behind. A warm body pressed against my back, and Julian's chin came to rest on my shoulder. He didn't speak. He just held me. We stood there together, in the quiet of the new day, watching the sunrise. The silence between us was no longer empty, no longer a space for hiding. It was full. It was rich with unspoken understanding, with shared history, with the promise of a future. It was the silence of home. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my hand covering his where they were clasped over my stomach. I thought about the boy I had been, the one who hid in the dusty shadows of the church balcony, convinced he was invisible, convinced he was safer alone. He seemed like a stranger to me now, a ghost from a past life. Julian hadn't rescued me. He hadn't swooped in with his wealth and power to save the poor, lost boy. That would have been too easy, and it would have been a lie. What he did was far more profound. He saw me. In all my quiet, fearful invisibility, he saw me. He offered me not a rescue, but respect. He created a safe, steady space where I could find the courage to rescue myself. He gave me a job, yes, but he also gave me purpose. He gave me his attention, but he also gave me his vulnerability. The difference in our ages, in our wealth, in our life experiences, those things hadn't vanished. They were still there, but they were no longer a chasm between us. They were just context. They were part of the landscape of the life we were choosing to build together, a life founded not on dependency or obligation, but on a partnership of mutual care, a deep and quiet intimacy, and a steady, abiding love that had found its voice in the silence. I was no longer afraid. I was home.